Well, welcome everyone to our May webinar on key takeaways from 3 years of website benchmarking. My name is Nicole Forschler-Horn and I'm Vice President of JMH Consulting. JMH Consulting is a consulting firm that works exclusively in higher education to help with marketing and recruitment efforts as well as launch non-credit certificate programs. Today, we're going to be focused on website benchmarking. And as many of you may know, in 2011, JMH launched the first ever website benchmarking initiative for departments that serve non-traditional students in higher ed. Now, 3 years later, we're excited to share our key takeaways and trends that we've seen from the millions of website visits tracked in this initiative. With more than 24 participating institutions from across the United States and Canada, we believe this data set offers an unrivaled glimpse into the behavior of visitors to adult education websites. We have 3 presenters today, one from JMH Consulting, and we also have 2 presenters from the University of Richmond who are joining us, who are going to share a little bit about the value that they saw in the website benchmarking initiative and changes that they've made over the years of their involvement. Let me tell you a little bit about our first presenter, and that's John Horn. John is the president of JMH Consulting and a leading expert on data-driven marketing in higher education. John serves as JMH Consulting's lead consultant on marketing engagements and has managed the firm's operations since its inception in 1998. Also joining us from the University of Richmond, we have James Campbell, and he is the Director of Marketing and Communications for the the School of Professional and Continuing Studies, a position he's held for more than 10 years. He's an active member of APSEA, having served as the chair of the Marketing Seminar Planning Committee, the Associate Chair of Awards and Recognition for APSEA's MESS Network, and is the current chair of APSEA's National Awards Committee. Also joining us is Daniel Hokut. He's the manager of the University of Richmond School of Professional and Continuing Studies. Daniel works in the school's 4-person marketing and communications team consisting of its director, James, who we'll also obviously hear from, its communications coordinator, graphics coordinator, and web manager. Daniel shared this with me, and I think it's a great last line. For fun, he likes working on his PhD in English with focus on technology, media studies, discourse, and rhetoric. And Daniel and James, if you want to say hi before I transition everything over to John, please do.
Hi, Nicole and John. I'm glad to be joining you guys today.
Yep, and we look forward to chatting with everybody a little bit later in the presentation.
Great. Thank you both. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping things. You'll notice on the GoToWebinar dashboard that you can ask questions. So if you have questions throughout the presentation, please go ahead and type those in. We will stop at a couple places during the presentation to answer questions, and any questions that we're not able to answer, we will follow up with you separately offline. If you're not part of the website benchmarking initiative, we're going to send a link after the webinar with information on how to sign up. You'll get quarterly reports on trends and tracking, and your information is bundled with everyone else's information, so it's protected. You'll also receive a link to a recording of this webinar. And finally, as a teaser before I turn it over to John, in June we will continue our webinar series, and actually Excelsior College will be presenting the next webinar, and we're helping to promote it for them. They're going to have a presentation from Michael Sullivan, and that name may sound familiar to some of you who work in higher education marketing. Michael is the former Chief Marketing Officer for the Apollo Group, and under his leadership, he helped bring the I Am a Phoenix campaign for the University of Phoenix. So great background. And he's going to be presenting on building a 21st century education brand. So we will send you more information about how to sign up for that webinar later on this month. I think that is all that I'll be sharing. John, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. And welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you join us today and to talk about this benchmarking initiative. As Nicole said, this has been a labor of love now for going on 3.5 years. We've collected some amazing information, and we're very excited today to be pulling some nuggets out of that. Obviously, there's far too much for us to try to cover everything that's come out of it. So what we've tried to do is to really hone this down to a few, as Nicole said, takeaways, some interesting observations and things that we think you'll find actionable or at the very least very interesting both for yourself and perhaps to go back and share with your team. The flow of today's presentation, I'm going to spend just a couple minutes kind of giving you an overview of the Website Benchmarking Initiative, just so you have a sense of where this data is coming from, what we're looking at in it. But I'll spend most of my time at least, talking about the results and observations, those key takeaways that we think you'll find interesting today. Once I wrap up, I'm going to turn things over to James and Daniel, who are going to talk a little bit about how the University of Richmond uses benchmarking data, not only information coming out of this initiative, but also their own internal data, which I think will be very interesting for those of you attending. So without further ado, let me jump in and begin to talk about the benchmarking initiative and kind of how it developed into what it is today. So obviously, there's no lack of metrics out there nowadays. You know, I feel like 5-7 years ago, there was a lot of conversation around, we need more data, we should become more data-driven, or we should become a more data-driven organization. And, you know, there was a real push for getting access to more and more varieties of analytics. Google Analytics has certainly been a big part of that on the marketing side. We have access to all of these there, and this is just a sampling of some of the types of metrics that we can look at nowadays. And of course, Google is now calling visits sessions and visitors users, but you can still see there's this wide range. And so as we started to look at all these, and think about the clients that we work with and the work that we do, we started to want to ask questions. We started wanting to figure out answers to things like, well, how many visitors do I get each day on this website? But we'd also want to ask questions like, well, should I be getting more visitors than I am? And we found that the first question was pretty easy to answer, right? Any web analytics tool is going to be able to tell you how many visits or visitors arrive at your website with reasonable accuracy. But it's much harder to answer the question, are we doing well? Are we getting enough visitors? We might ask, all right, how many visits am I getting from search engines, right? Thinking about search engine optimization. And that'll tell us how many visits we're getting. But what I don't know is, well, am I doing well? Or should I be doing much better on search engines? Should I be pulling more traffic than I am? We might ask how many pages of visitor views on the website, right? Pages per visit is a metric that's easily accessible. And we might get a number like 2.8 or 3.4. But those numbers really don't have a lot of context. What would be more interesting, though, is, well, are they leaving too quickly? Should people be staying longer? Could I be doing more to keep them on the website? Should I be doing more to keep them on the website? So what we found is that the questions on the top here were pretty easy to answer based off of an individual institution's analytics data. The questions on the bottom, though, really can't be answered without context. And so that got us thinking, gosh, it sure would be nice if we knew some averages, if we knew what was a typical metric for websites. And so we started looking around. We knew we wanted to find benchmarks to gauge our work, but what we found was that there really wasn't anything out there specific to our industry. Really not even much that's specific to higher education in general, much less people that work primarily with non-traditional students. But what we knew is that we had access already to a few Google Analytics accounts. You know, we had access to, I don't know, 8 or 10 of our clients' analytics accounts, and we thought, boy, you know, if we could even just work with that small sample of data and pull those together, we would at least get some sort of a sense of what a typical or average metric was for a lot of these questions we were asking. We also realized this could scale. It didn't take a lot of effort, and there was fairly low risk in pulling anonymous aggregate data out of analytics tools and analyzing it with some pivot tables, some charts, things like that. And we thought, boy, this wouldn't take an enormous investment of capital to do this analysis. I think it might work. And so we started putting this together, as Nicole said, back in 2011. We got about a dozen schools to participate originally. We've had a few schools drop out. We've had lots of new schools join in, and we've got something just over about 20 schools that are participating right now in this. So here's a few examples of some of the schools that are participating. Obviously, there are many, many others besides this, and Richmond's there. Square in the middle, thank them for their participation. But as you can also see, we've got a wide variety of credit, non-credit programs, public and private schools. We've got schools from pretty much every region of the U.S. and even 2 or 3 in Canada that are participating. So, I'd love for this data set to grow over time. We'd love for some of you that maybe aren't participating in this to join so we can have an even more representative data set. But we feel pretty good at this point that this is giving us a good swath of sort of the non-traditional departments in the industry. A couple of key metrics for this. We've been doing data for a little over 3 years. We've had 21 participating schools, and in this time we have tracked aggregate data on 34.5 million visits. That's not page views. These are individual visits to websites. So it's really a pretty large range of data at this point. Now, in terms of our research, we've done 2 types of research on this data, and this will be important because it will give some context to some of the charts and graphs that I'm going to show you. First of all, the primary type of research that we've done over time has been our quarterly State of the Industry trending reports. And what this is we pull data every 3 months. We take quarterly data from each of our participating members, and we track that data in a growing database of information. So we have data for some of the participating members that goes back 3.5 years. And what we're looking at in this analysis are trends. I'll show you some of those in just a moment. We're looking at trends in quantity of visits. And of course, we're kind of benchmarking schools against themselves. So we're looking at trends over time. Have we on average seen an increase in visits from 2012 to 2013? Have bounce rates changed at all? Have the origin or the source of traffic shifted over time? So this is all looking at trends, and this is the ongoing research that we do consistently. The other type of research that we do, though, are one-time, what we call insights reports. And these are quick snapshot analyses asking a particular question. And you can see some of the topics that we've looked at here. I'll be sharing several of the insights coming out of those reports a little bit later in the presentation. But the difference between these really is that the insights reports, we're not tracking those each quarter. Those are one-time analyses that we've done, usually pulling somewhere between 6 months to a year worth of data across all of the participating members. And we've done something like 15 to 20 of those reports. And I believe that most, if not all of those, are available for free on our website. So you guys, after the presentation, don't go now, but after the presentation, you're welcome to visit our JMH site, look under our resources area, and we have all of these reports available for free. The trending reports are not. That's the carrot that we dangle out there to get people to join the initiative. If you want to get access sharing their data so that we can all learn more about these trends. So with that, let's jump in and let's actually look at some of this analysis. I thought I would start with some of the trending reports. So first thing that I will show you is over the last 3 years, how have visits to websites changed? So what we did is we took all of the participating members, we aggregated all their visits, and we averaged it out because we know that there are some big institutions, some small institutions. And what we wanted to look at here was, on average, are we seeing more visits or less visits coming to websites? And what you can actually see is in this chart, this is showing you a year snapshot from left to right. So the first dot on the left is January. The last dot there is December for the 3 previous years. And what's interesting is that there are definitely some seasonal trends, right? If you look, January was the #1 month in, I believe, well, at least 2012 and 2013, not 2011. And then you see this nice sort of bump back up in March and April of visits, and then sort of a decline in those summer months, and then a bump back up around August, and then just kind of a slow decline through the end of the year. And that is a seasonal pattern that we have seen consistently for the last 3 years. But we've also seen consistent growth in visits. As you can see here, almost every month of the year, 2012 beat, in fact, I think it is every single month, 2012 beat 2011, and 2013 beat 2012. So we are seeing overall a nice, steady increase in visits, even when you account for all the kind of seasonal trends. Now, what we've also seen, though, pages per visit. So how many pages are people looking at? What's interesting here is we're seeing almost the inverse of this. We have seen a steady decline in the number of pages that people on average are looking at during each of their visits from 2011 through 2013. Now, I think part of this can be explained by a couple of factors. I won't say that I even know what's definitely causing this, but I do know that we're seeing more and more schools use landing pages, and landing pages typically have a higher bounce rate, and even if somebody fills out the inquiry form and get to a thank you page, they may at that point leave. So they may have only visited 2 pages, even though they've accomplished your goal, which is to get them to come to a page and complete an inquiry form so you can follow up with them. But that's going to result in a depression of the kind of the metric for pages per visit. We're also seeing, though, a lot more traffic from social media sites and other sites where we're seeing quality of that traffic is not quite as good, and that may be contributing to this. Again, don't quite know why, but if you're seeing this same effect in your own analytics data, this at least gives you some solace that it's an industry-wide, or it seems to be at least an industry-wide effect, that people are not looking at as many pages on the websites. Bounce rates. This is also something that we hear a lot about. If you're not familiar with what a bounce rate is, it's essentially a measure of the percentage of people that come to your site and don't stay there. So how many people arrive on your website, but before they view a second page on the site, they leave. So they never view that second page. And it's always articulated as a percentage. So your bounce rate might be, let's say, 50%. So 50% of the visits, people come to your website, they don't look at a second page. And that's right about what we're seeing as the average. If you'll see here, we have seen a gradual increase in bounce rates. Again, this may be determined by some of the same reasons that we're having fewer pages per visit. In fact, those are certainly linked causally. If people are bouncing, they're looking at fewer pages. Thus, you're going to see high correlations between these two metrics. But it's been interesting. We hit in, I guess, late last year, 2013, for the first month ever, we saw bounce rates go above 50%. Where back in 2011 or so, we were pretty consistently seeing bounce rates around 40 to 42%. Why is this? Again, I think landing pages, I think more traffic coming from social media sites, I think more aggressive marketing, which, you know, while effective, also does tend to pull in some people that are a little bit less qualified, and so they're a little more likely to bounce. I think we may also have better designed websites that are allowing people to sometimes find the information they're looking for without having to click around the site. So if someone comes to your home page and they're looking for a phone number and the phone number's right there on the home page, they're going to call that number, close their browser, and they'll show up as a bounce. So bounces are not always a bad thing, but knowing this trend, and I would suggest comparing this to what you're seeing in your own data, can yield some valuable insights. Mobile device. This was one of the hottest topics over the past several years. And I want to explain this graph a little bit. We actually did, this is not something that we've tracked as part of our trending. This is what we've looked at this as a one-off analysis. But because the landscape for mobile device uses has been changing so dramatically, we've repeated this analysis several times. And in fact, what we found is that when you go all the way back to 2010, which we were able to do with some of the historical data in our participating member accounts, back in 2010, 98% of the traffic to websites was coming from desktops, only 2% from mobile devices. And then we saw that more than double, the mobile traffic, more than double in 2011. And 2011 is when we first started seeing the inklings of some tablet visits. It wasn't even registering as 1%. It was below, it wouldn't even round up to 1% in terms of tablet visits. But there were a few in 2011. And then suddenly 2012, we saw this boom in the tablet market. Mobile device usage has continued to increase. And you can see since 2011, it has been almost a linear increase in mobile device usage. And I'm projecting out here a little bit of 2014 because we don't know how this is going to end up. But if the past performance continues with what we've seen, this year in 2014, we will see a full quarter of all of our traffic coming from mobile devices. And that is really significant, and I think this is the kind of data that's been driving schools to develop responsive websites and to really think about how they're engaging with mobile users who are less likely to fill out complex forms on their mobile device and less likely to navigate through lots of different pages looking for information. So this is probably one of the more interesting pieces of data we found. We also looked at day of the week. We thought, gosh, I wonder if there are any interesting trends about when people come to websites. So we looked at this in a couple different ways. This was one of them. What we found is that Tuesday was the most frequent day on which people would visit one of the websites or participating members. And if you see that, there's an interesting kind of bell curve there, with Saturday and Sunday at the ends being the lowest days of the week. And I think that's useful. It may not be the same for your site, and I encourage you to look at this in your own data. But if this does hold true, this has implications for when you might schedule email marketing to go out, when you might schedule events such as information sessions, based on when people are just naturally tend to be thinking about what you offer. So Tuesday was a big day, followed by Wednesday and then Monday. So those three were kind of the top three. We also wanted to look at, well, what about the quality of those visits? And so we looked at the bounce rate for those same day of the week breakdown, and what we found was almost the inverse. So not only were Saturday and Sunday getting fewer visits to the sites, but those visits tended to bounce at a much higher rate than they did on the other days. So not only was there a lot of traffic coming on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Mondays, but the traffic tended to stick around more than it did on the other days of the week. So just kind of reinforced the data from the first analysis. We also looked at hour of the day. So when are people coming during day? Are they coming first thing in the morning, over their lunch break, in the evening hours as they're sitting at home? And what we really found was that the high points of the day were between about 10 and 2. That was when visits peaked. So kind of late morning, people might be, have done a little work, got all their email out of the way, now they're thinking about their education, maybe some career type training, maybe, that's the degree that's going to lead to a promotion for them, or maybe getting out of this job and finding some sort of alternative career that educational programs might lead to. But we definitely saw that midday is when the most visits happened. But visits actually stayed pretty strong all the way out till about 10 p.m., which was also interesting. And if you think about that in terms of when you have customer service representatives available to answer the phone or to answer emails, there's quite a bit of interest from about 8 a.m. all the way through about 10 p.m. So that's we found pretty interesting. Now, another thing we looked at was search engines. So we wanted to find out, where are traffic coming from? People spend a lot of energy and a lot of time working on search engine optimization for their website. So first thing we looked at was, well, what are some standards out there for the world? And this is ComScore data from October of last year. They do this research about every 6 months and release it up a couple months later. So in October of last year, Google had a 67% market share in terms of search. Bing was at 18, Yahoo 11. So Yahoo and Bing together make up about 29% or so of all searches that are done. Google is about 67. Now this data is, it's maybe about 18 to 24 months old. So the data I'm going to show you from our analysis, this was a one-time analysis we did back, as I said, about a couple of years ago, was really different than this. And where the overall market share has not changed much since 2013. Google's dropped by a couple percentage points. What we found was that visits from Google accounted for about 90% of all search engine visits, where Bing and Yahoo totaled only about 10%. So that was a really different metric than what I expected, because it doesn't align at all with the overall market share for those search engines amongst all searchers out there. Now, does this have to do with higher education sites putting more energy into optimizing for Google? Maybe. Does it have to do with maybe Google preferring higher education sites or giving some preference in the ranking? I don't know, but it's interesting. And then, of course, you can't talk about search engines without also talking about social media. With this analysis, we looked at a number of things, but I think the most interesting result that came out of this was we wanted to see, well, where does what social media sites are people really coming from? There's Twitter, there's LinkedIn, Facebook, Pinterest. There's all kinds of sites that would be considered social media sites. When we looked at this, and this was maybe about a year and a half ago when we did this analysis, so certainly things have continued to change in the social media landscape, but what really surprised me was that it was 91% of these visits were from Facebook. I thought Facebook might have been 60 or 70%. I did not expect it to be 91. And I think LinkedIn was the number 2 source, but everything else, including Twitter and all the others, were a very small percentage, represented a very small percentage of the visits. So really, when we're talking about social media visits, if this still holds true, and if it holds true for your site, Facebook seems to be the accounting for the lion's share of this, and perhaps is where we should be putting the majority of our energies. Now, the last thing that I'm going to talk about before I hand things over to a gentleman from Richmond is just a quick word about something that's not actually part of the website benchmarking initiative, but was a paid advertising research project that we did, where we pulled a year's worth of data from 8 of our clients who are spending total spend of nearly $500,000 across these 5 platforms. And what we wanted to look at in this analysis was we wanted to see, well, how effective are these paid advertising channels at generating inquiries, at generating prospective students for our programs. In all of these cases that we looked at, we were using the advertising to drive to landing pages that were optimized with inquiry forms and such, and essentially the playing field was pretty level. So regardless of where the ad was showing, once someone clicked on the ad, they were going to see the same landing page with the same kind of inquiry forms and the same messaging. And here's what we found. Some real interesting surprises in this. One, in terms of volume, it was really no surprise that Google paid search was the highest volume. That's where most organizations, including most of our clients, tend to put the majority of their advertising budget for online marketing. What was interesting, though, that we found is that, the conversion rates differed dramatically between these platforms. So where on Google paid search, we were seeing conversion rates of 6.5% on average. We were seeing from Facebook conversion rates of 1%. Now, if you think about that, that means you have to drive almost 6 times the amount of traffic from paid advertising on Facebook than you do to get one inquiry than you would off of Google paid search. Okay. Not that means that Facebook is useless. There's some branding. There's certainly something to be said for awareness marketing and all that. But what was really interesting is that Google paid search were converting at a much higher rate. And if you look at the cost per inquiry, the other thing that surprised us about this was that LinkedIn, while it didn't have the largest volume, had a really good conversion rate when you reach people on LinkedIn, and it had the lowest cost per inquiry of any of these platforms. So LinkedIn is a tough platform to market on, we have found, but when you do it well and when it works, it's actually a very effective platform for professional education and for master's degree programs in particular. So some interesting data that we found. So at this point, what I want to do is to let James and Daniel take over and to tell us a little bit about their work around benchmarking. We'll come back at the end and have a couple minutes for questions. So if you guys do have questions for anything that I've talked about, go ahead and put those into the questions box, and we'll try to answer as many as we can before we wrap up the presentation. James and Daniel, let me go ahead and give you control here. And I think you should be able to take over.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Thanks, John.
Sure. Let me just. I'm not hearing anything from you guys. Are you?
Okay.
We're here. We're trying to advance the slide.
Okay. See if you can. Work your magic. Nothing.
John, if you want to just advance the first slide for us, we should be good to go.
Okay. Try it now. I think you have control now.
There we go. Great. So, so Daniel and I are going to talk a little bit about our participation in the study and why analytics and benchmarking are important to us as a marketing unit. So first of all, it's for us, it's part of the big picture of data-driven decision making. And what we mean by that is it should be part of strategic marketing planning. And for us, that means starting with a written plan. And we mean a school-wide plan as well as specific marketing and communication plans for individual programs. Typically, those include outlining your objectives, strategies, and tactics. And for most people that are part of this webinar that are listening in, that's not going to be news to you. But what we let benchmarking and analytics also do for us in marketing planning is help define key performance measures. And some folks call them key performance initiatives, KPIs, key success indicators. But it's important for us to realize that as we're talking about objectives, strategies, and tactics, what are we going to track to make sure that we're making headway towards reaching our objectives? And so when we talk about key performance measures, we really do let our objectives drive what those are going to be. So typically we're looking at a performance comparison, and that's why the idea of benchmarking is so critical. Where are we compared to where we were last year or 2 years ago or 3 years ago? And that's helps us do a couple of different things when we're actually reporting where we are on our marketing plans. Specifically, web analytics as key performance measures help us do a couple of things in terms of awareness. And John mentioned it before when he was talking about Facebook. Facebook for us and Facebook advertising is a critical way for us to do some awareness marketing online and specifically in the social media sphere. Additionally, web analytics help us see if we're increasing our awareness. It helps us gauge our interest, and we do that specifically by looking not only at our web analytics through Google measuring visits or now sessions, but also comparing that in the benchmarking study to see if what we're doing is keeping up with what our peers in the industry are doing who are also participating in the study. What's really critical for us is to remember that it's important to report our results. So, we take a lot of time and we put a lot of effort into collecting data, but what we've realized, particularly in the last year, it's just as important to take the time to make sure that we're reporting what we're collecting, not only internally within the marketing team, but to the school's leadership. Whether that's our deans, our internal clients and program chairs. And we do that for a couple of reasons. It helps share some of our successes. It helps us spot some trends. It also helps us spot potential issues. And what we've also learned is that if you develop the right kind of reporting tool, it could become a communication tool for your dean when your dean is talking to other leaders on campus. And I wanted to take just a minute to show you one of the ways that we do that. So every month we produce this quick dashboard that actually highlights some of our key performance measures, one of which is web visits. And what we do is, because these are tied to our objectives, it lets us easily show where we were versus last year. Are we, again, moving towards accomplishing some of our goals? Same thing with program inquiries. Whether we're driving those inquiries through online marketing or more traditional advertising efforts. One of the other key performance measures we look at are the number of started applications. We use an online application, so that's easy for us to pull data every day if we need to, but we report it monthly to our dean. A submitted application for us, people who actually complete all of the requirements and then submit it to us for processing, is another KPM that we track and report. And then once students are actually admitted into programs. And we do look at started, submitted, and admitted apps for the next term that's starting. When we're reporting, we're looking 2 to 3 terms ahead all the time, but for this reporting, we're always looking at the next starting term. And then anytime we launch a new program, we also take a minute to pull together applicable data on the new program. that we may be launching. And for us, it happens to be a graduate program in nonprofit studies. So we're reporting those KPMs on that particular program as well.
And I'll talk a little bit about how we actually use the benchmarking initiative internally. I put up here a slide on the bounce rate hours and the JMH benchmark. So the first thing we do, we're looking to see are we in line with what the benchmark is doing. And you can see in this slide we're following that fairly well, except for this very strange aberration that occurred in June of 2011 when we had an astronomically low bounce rate of 9.19%. And we thought, well, that's great. We must have done something unbelievably good during that month to give ourselves such a low bounce rate. We looked at that and said, we better, whatever we did, we better replicate it. We better figure out what it is. We better change our website. We better make sure that we hold on to that. It's when we looked at that rate relative to the benchmark that we realized that, you know what, this is an aberration. This is not something that we did or we accomplished. And what we ended up doing is not making knee-jerk reactions, but using that benchmark to help stabilize our decision-making and make sure that we weren't going off half-cocked when it turns out we think this data anomaly was caused as a result of the way our roll-up account works with the university-wide roll-up account works with our individual school account. This was a data anomaly. We would have not caught the data anomaly nearly as quickly had we not had some kind of contextual piece to compare it to. We also have, we look at ways to differentiate our traffic and our data from the benchmark because recognizing that JMH, as they're pulling together the aggregate data, they're doing averages, we know that there are going to be departures from averages. So one of the things we do is work to differentiate our data from our local data from the national trend lines. Because we're a school in the University of Richmond, we have a master brand, and we're a piece of that of the university. Because that's the case, our referral traffic, and you can see in this chart, is much higher than both at the current and at the annual rate than JMH benchmarks. And that's because we just get more referral traffic overall from the University of Richmond. That's our highest referral area, and you can see that it even is as high, almost as high as the amount of traffic we get at search. And so recognizing those local differences also help us put us in the right, where are we on the national level? And if it differs from the national level, explore why is it that we differ from the national level. And that just gives us a lot of insight into how we need to relate to the larger university's brand and the university's web presence. Are there specific pages on the university site that we need to look at carefully to be sure that they're referring effectively? Are there specific keywords or taglines that we need to use on the university's webpage to be sure they resonate with those who go to the University of Richmond webpage to find School of Professional and Continuing Studies programs? And the last slide, I want to talk a little bit, as James has pointed out, we do a lot of benchmarking against ourselves. And so not only are we using the national benchmark to get a sense of where we are, we're also always looking at ourselves to determine success of our marketing efforts. And so in this slide, we're taking a look at how we're using the number of visits over time to check to see where we are relative to ourselves. As you can see from this slide, we're doing really well when it comes to visits. We're seeing a lot more traffic, and this is higher than the trend line that we've seen on the JMH benchmark initiative. Sorry. So we track all of the same, at the very least, at the very minimum, we track all of the same metrics that the JMH benchmark follows. That way, every one of those we can then follow ourselves and be sure we're matching up to the benchmark. But we do that internally as well over time. And this this is the kind of data that we are then contributing to the benchmark because we want to know how we fit into the national trend, just to be sure that we're on track. We're always looking to be sure that within continuing education nationwide and in Canada too, that we are in fact on the same line as everyone else. So these are just three very small specific ways that we use benchmark data, either from the JMH National Benchmark or from our own benchmark, to get a sense of where we are and how our marketing efforts in terms of the web are functioning and working over time.
Wonderful.
And that goes back to you, John. Sorry.
No, thank you. Is my audio on?
Your audio
Yes, it is.
is on.
Okay. Great. Well then, thank you guys so much. That's helpful and reassuring. Gives us solace to hear that how people are using this information, and you know, not that we don't use it ourselves. We certainly do much of the same type of work with our own clients. I know we want to leave a little bit of time for questions, so I'm going to just wrap up with a quick quote for you guys that I think underscores much of the reason why our firm has invested resources in trying to arrive at some of this knowledge, and why I believe it's in your best interest and everyone's best interest to look at your own data, to understand it in the context of other both competitors and schools from other regions of the country. And that is the price of light is less than the cost of darkness. I love that quote. It does take some effort, and you can imagine looking at some of the charts that Daniel was sharing with you. Those are not instant efforts, but the time and the effort that it takes to learn this information, I believe, saves us far more in the mistakes or poor decisions that we might make not having this information. So I would encourage you all. We'll wrap up with two things. I'll turn things back over to Nicole with these, but I really hope you guys will join the initiative, study your own data, and join us for the next webinar as well.
Thanks, John. And as I said, if you have not signed up for the website benchmarking initiative, we will, in our follow-up email, which will have the recording of the webinar, we will also include a link to the website that you can fill out a form, and we'll get started. It's fairly simple. So a couple of questions that we have, both John, for you as well as for the University of Richmond team. John, one question is, can you share what you think has been the most surprising discovery that's come out of the 3 years of WBI research?
Sure. And actually, probably my most surprising discovery was not actually the come out of the research itself, but came from when we wanted to look at conversion rates in our research, and we found, this was a couple of years ago, we found that less than half of the participating schools in our initiative were tracking online conversions at all in Google Analytics, and that just blew me away because I knew how many of them were spending advertising dollars. I knew how important their websites were. So, you know, configuring Google Analytics takes some energy and some effort to do, and you know, just finding that we couldn't even study the conversion rates overall across the participating members because not enough of them had that configured and were tracking that. I guess another couple of surprise, the growth in mobile users. I mean, it's no surprise to us, that mobile traffic has been increasing. But it seemed like every time that we looked at it over the past 3-4 years, it had doubled. So just the exponential growth in mobile traffic was probably the other most surprising thing.
And is there anything that coming out of this that you would want to tell continuing education units and probably higher education departments in general, things that they should absolutely do based on what you're seeing, the behavior of website visitors?
Yeah, but again, I'm probably going to answer this a little differently than than you might be asking. But frankly, the one thing that I think that I would so strongly encourage you guys to do is to not take your analytics for granted. So the individual changes and the decisions that you might make off of your analytics data is going to differ from institution to institution. But I will tell you, we do a lot of analyses of how Google Analytics is implemented at different institutions. And in most cases, it is so poorly or so incompletely implemented that I wonder about them making any decisions off of that data. In other words, Google Analytics over the past 2 or 3 years has become a much more complex tool than it was back 4 and 5 years ago. And most schools don't have it set up accurately. Many of us that are not tracking goals and leads. So if there's one thing that I wanted to encourage you to go back and do, it is to make sure that your analytics data is tracking accurate information and make sure you have analytics fully set up. There are dozens and dozens of things that you need to look at in the way it's set up to make sure that you're tracking all of your website properties and that you're getting accurate and data that you can really make good decisions off of.
Great. Well, a similar kind of question for James and Daniel. If you guys can share with us what you think the biggest change or impact having this information has made for you.
Well, I think there are a couple of things, just to kind of piggyback on what John mentioned, the importance of online marketing and its impact on your web analytics. It's been critical for us. We're actually probably fairly new into the game when we look at how long some of our peers have been doing aggressive online marketing. But the great thing about analytics is you see the immediate results of what you're doing over whatever platforms you're choosing to advertise on. The other thing would be to make sure that you're tracking those campaigns and understanding, as John's mentioned several times, the context of the different analytics. So, knowing that Facebook visits tend to increase your overall visits, but drag down your number of pages and increase your bounce rate. Keeping all of that in perspective as you're moving forward to set new goals or to modify campaigns. So that's keeping the analytics in context as you're starting to make changes and understand how those changes are going to impact some of what you're seeing in Google Analytics.
Right.
And I would add to that. As we've looked at the benchmark data itself, it's become important to us, as John pointed out, that we understand what analytics is doing and how Google Analytics is changing over time, how it is becoming a more robust tool. One of the things that I did is went to the Google Analytics Academy. They have the Google Analytics Academy that Google offers, just to get a little bit of basic training and understand how the data is collected and how it is then reported, what kind of things that the Google servers do to the data along the way, and where we can make changes in how that data is reported and reviewed in our reporting, in the reporting feature itself. Had I not done that, I think I would be very lost right now when it comes to Google Analytics, because there have been significant changes, especially in the past few months.
Well, and my final question for the both of you, and it's a little bit on the selfish side, but I think this is a concern that a lot of people have, is how difficult was it for you to get involved with the website benchmarking initiative?
It wasn't difficult at all. It's just a matter of making sure that the folks on JMH's team that needed access to our analytics had those privileges set up. And it was that we worked internally with our web services team actually manages those privileges, and it was just making sure that they had the right information to add your users to our analytics data.
Well, I appreciate everybody's time, and thank you for joining us. As I said, we will send a recording of this webinar out. That will probably go out tomorrow. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out, email, or give us a call. And special thanks, James and Daniel, for joining us and sharing your lessons learned and how you're using this information. I think it makes a great difference to have a university perspective on the conversation. So as I said, keep your eyes open for the email with the webinar recording and the WBI sign-up. And I thank everyone for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.